This morning, if you'll turn to the book of Ecclesiastes, that's where we're studying at in this particular study. The book of Ecclesiastes is a challenging study for many different reasons, and we have tried to make the impression. Hey, there they are. I'll try to remember. I know that Lisa won one. She's not over here. I'll hold on to these, but we'll give those to you at the end, okay? I have some of those promised, but I'm not sure exactly all of them. But anyway, the book of Ecclesiastes is a challenging study, as I was saying, because in it, the wise man tries to explain what life is all about. And as he does it, there are times when you read Ecclesiastes and you're left scratching your head saying, is that really in the Bible? Is that really something that we should do? Because it seems to go against the totality of what the Bible teaches in other places. But what we've tried to emphasize is that Ecclesiastes has to be read as a whole. It has to be understood not just in isolated segments or just lifting a verse here or there, but understand it as a journey, as the wise man attempting to describe perhaps his own experience. That's the general assumption, maybe an autobiography of sorts, that he said, this is what I've tried in life. I've tried, the old adage is, wine, women, and song. I've tried those pleasures of life. I've tried to pursue riches and wealth, and I have not just pursued those things, I acquired them in abundance. And so I thought, well, maybe that will bring me satisfaction and happiness and purpose. And the litany of things that he goes through that are so often even employed and utilized by people today to say, if I just could have this or do this or, experience that, then I would be happy, I would be contented, I would find purpose, satisfaction would surely be mine. And yet throughout the book, repeatedly he says, all is vanity, vanity of vanities. And for those that have the workbook, I'll just show you there. You see the front, someone made this little image and I copied it. Ecclesiastes, of course, is written and then it's kind of against a backdrop and you see the smoke around the letters spelling out the word Ecclesiastes. And that word vanity comes from the Hebrew word that means the breath, or it can be like a vapor or smoke. It's something that really doesn't have substance. You try to grasp it, and you think you have it firmly in your grasp, and you open your hands and it dissipates, it's gone. It's as if you never had it to begin with. And he says life is like that. So many times we think that we want something or that we can get something, and if we get it, then everything will be just as it should be, and we grasp it firmly and we've got it in both hands, and just as soon as we open our hands maybe to examine it or to experience it, poof, it's gone, as it were. And so this morning, the lesson we're on, I guess this is lesson number 5 or 6, so I didn't number the lessons, but anyway, seeking control, finding chaos. We're not looking at the book chapter by chapter or verse by verse, but we're looking at it thematically by different subjects. And so the lesson for this morning, seeking control but finding chaos. Do you like to be in control? You don't have to answer because I know the answer. Of course you do. We all like to be in control. A select few, and I'm in that number, but a select few in the audience this morning can remember or cannot remember a time when their television did not have a remote control. But I remember owning a television that did not have a remote control. You remember that? A lot of you remember that. And maybe I say that I was the remote control for Dad, right, or Mom. Get up and turn the channel, and it was a knob, whatever. And yes, we went to Grandma's house, and she still had the black and white TV that had, I don't know why we called them rabbit ears. They were just two, radio antennas stuck out to each side. And of course, you'd have to do what? Twist and turn and back and forth. And that number, we never did put aluminum foil on ours. I don't know if that really worked or not. Did that work if you put aluminum foil on the rabbit ears? I just remember seeing that. But I was the remote control, but today, we have a remote control for everything, and I mean everything. We visited a family yesterday. Our kids, of course, most of you know, were part of a homeschool group that Amy helped begin in Putnam County, and they have their little graduation ceremony. It was the end of the year, and one of our families, they have done very well for themselves. I'll just say it like that. They're wealthy, exorbitantly wealthy, and good for them. They're hard workers and so forth, but they were hosting, a graduation party to celebrate the graduates and everything at their house, and I went into their bathroom, and I kid you not, they had a remote control on the wall for the various functions of the sink and the toilet. True story. That's a little fancier than it is at my house. I've got a light switch. And, you've probably got a light switch too and got a lever and, a knob to turn on the hot water and the cold water. That's about as fancy as we get at my house. But we like control. We like to be able to manage things. But the wise man is going to say in life, as much as you want to have control and you pursue control, sometimes all you find in its place is chaos. What do you do in those instances? Well, here is a sampling of propositions from various perspectives about whether life has meaning or makes sense. Really, can you control life? Is really the question we're asking, maybe by way of introduction. Life is not always logical, but it is always meaningful. I'm not sure I even, appreciate what that means, but okay. Number 2, life doesn't make sense, and that's the beauty of it. That was one philosophical conclusion. Number 3, sometimes the more you try to make sense of life, the less sense it makes. Probably all had that experience to some degree. Number 4, life is a series of random moments that make no sense until you look back on them. Okay, kind of the 2020 vision that we have, not looking to the future, but looking to the past. We have experienced that. And then number 5, the meaning of life is not something you find, it's something you create, but sometimes it's okay if it doesn't make sense. Well, that's just a sampling of 5 different deductions that people have made about the uncertainty of life, just the almost inevitable search for meaning that escapes us as we try to pursue it. And yet the book of Ecclesiastes will tell us what life is about and why it makes sense and why it's meaningful. And I've tried not to do it too often, at least in every lesson, to look at the only point of the book. But nevertheless, it is maybe the only point of the book. And I know that sounds contradictory, but when you turn to the last 2 verses of the very last chapter, that's the way the book has to be read, almost in a sense, not backward per se, but these verses cannot be omitted from any conclusion we draw, the conclusion of the whole matter. When all has been said and when all has been considered, the wise man said, here's where we come down. Here's what it is distilled down to its final essence. Fear God and keep His commandments. This is man's all. Our older versions say there, this is the whole duty of man. Newer versions rightly update the language from the original to say, this is our all. This is all that there is. Not just that it's your duty or responsibility. This is where life is really found. This is what makes life what it is. Because God's going to bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. So that has to be kept in mind. And no matter what we say about the book or what we might read from a particular passage or section in the book, these last 2 verses have to be kept in mind as essential to proper understanding. So this morning, the question is, when we seek control but we find chaos, is there any benefit to human wisdom? And you may not have thought about this before, but when you encounter people that don't have a background in Christianity, when they don't have an upbringing that most of us had, where the Bible was honored and respected as the Word of God, and where morality based on the truth of God's Word was not just suggested, and most of the time for us it was enforced, wasn't it? Dad and Mom expected us, even other authority figures were expected to abide by the guidelines and the ethics that the Bible taught, whether they said it came from the Bible or not. That's how our society was built. That's how the American experiment came into existence, if you will. And we could talk about the history and the sociology behind all of those things, but I won't get into that. But nevertheless, is there any benefit to human wisdom? That is it possible to be wise apart from serving God? Now, we've just read that ultimately there's not any value in human wisdom unless it takes us to an appreciation for and a submission to divine wisdom that then orders our lives and causes us to live in a way in view of judgment to come. But nevertheless, I thought we would take this lesson just to explore human wisdom. Human wisdom might have value. Now, I don't know if you'd always call it human wisdom. Maybe there was a more common term for it, and that word common plays into it, common sense. Is there such a thing as common sense? Not anymore. I was waiting for somebody to say that. Not anymore. Common sense is not that common anymore. That's been attributed to a number of different people who have kind of looked at the way things have happened over the last, and interestingly, it's not just in the last, we would say 20 years, 50 years. People have made that same, observation in some form or fashion for centuries, even in context outside of, our United States. People have looked at the way that their particular country or nation or civilization was acting, and they said, there's just no common sense anymore, and even if they didn't use the term. And where does that come from? And how do we possess it? Is it really human wisdom, or is it actually divine wisdom that God gives us each as His people because we bear His image? Well, that's a good discussion to have. One of the things, and you don't encounter, I'm sure, in your day-to-day conversations very often, if ever, an individual who's actually an advocate for, and I can't even say a believer in, they would dislike that idea of a believer in, but individuals that espouse atheism, to say they believe that there is not a God. They're believers, they're just a believer in non-belief, a believer that there is not a God. Those people are few and far between in Cumberland County and most of the Bible Belt. Occasionally you'll run into one of those people, but how do you deal with them when you do? Well, one of the things that we kind of try to look at when we equip people to encounter the claims of atheism, and we try to help them, hopefully, if you say you don't believe in God, to perhaps consider evidence for Him, is one of the lines of evidence is the idea of moral oughtness. Moral oughtness, O-U-G-H-T-N-E-S-S, oughtness, things that we ought to do. And we all have a sense of moral oughtness. And by that we mean that there are things that we consider right and wrong, separate and apart from any teaching or guideline or influence. We just kind of know that instinctually, innately. Where does that come from? Animals don't possess it, but human beings do. And I would submit that that comes from God. And that common sense, from that point, even goes into other aspects of our lives as well. But think about this, and we're going to read through these kind of quickly. We're going to look at the benefits of human wisdom, and then the limitations of human wisdom, and then we're going to just simply, again, circle back and end up where we started with the wisdom that God gives and how that integrates into our lives today. Number one, human wisdom can have value as it relates to success in life. Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 10, just letting the Bible speak for itself. The wise man said, "Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. For there is no work or device or knowledge or wisdom in the grave where you are going." Work hard, work with diligence. And by and large, usually speaking, that will lead to better outcomes. The best employees in any company, corporation, organization, or wherever should be the people within it that claim to be followers of God, that claim to be Christians. You should be among the very best employees. And we could all probably share experiences. I don't have near the work-related experience that a lot of you do in the public realm, so to speak, but I worked enough in my high school and early adult years to see this, and even otherwise, that people that don't follow God don't always take their work very seriously. They're only working for the paycheck. They're working, you remember as Paul says, when he says to do it with all your might, Paul said, don't just work to be a man pleaser. That's an old way of saying what? Don't just work when the boss is watching. You probably have a story or more than one story about that. just working when the boss is watching. Now today, technology has perhaps reached a point where the boss is always watching. I was talking with an individual, and I don't remember even how we got onto this, but he was talking about that, he had the privilege to work from home, where he said, "You think that sounds like a good deal?" And I thought, well, yeah, that sounds like a pretty good deal to work from home. He said, "I am monitored continually. Every keystroke that I put in my computer is monitored. They know, what I'm doing." He said, used to be you could go into the office, if kind of a break in the action, you could, flip over and read about your favorite sports team or do something else. And, that was just kind of generally accepted if you still got your work done. He said, but now I work from home, and every stroke he makes on his keyboard, on his computer, his boss or someone higher up the food chain can see what he's doing. So there's no goofing off. There's no, downtime. You really have to work and work hard. But Christians shouldn't be, distressed at that. We should be the people who work with all of our might. We should be the people who do not idolize work. Now, the danger is, of course, that we can allow work to become a god that competes with the true God. We can say, well, I want to be successful, so I'm going to go in early, I'm going to stay late, and by that I might neglect my family, I might, minimize my spiritual responsibilities. We still have to let work have its proper place and not elevate it to a point where it comes in between our relationship with God, or even, I would say, our relationship with family or other balanced, parts of life that have to be kept in proper order. But the wise man says, do your work, because once you die, there's no more opportunity. You have an opportunity now to do your best. And I know that sounds kind of like a commencement speech from this time of year, but that's true. Diligence usually leads to better outcomes. We can see that. That's common sense. But again, it's rooted even in the way that God would have us to live. Number 2, protection and preservation. Back to chapter 7 and verse 12, wisdom is a defense as money is a defense, but the excellence of knowledge is that wisdom gives life to those who have it. Now, you may say, well, what are you talking about here? Well, the wise man is saying, be wise, be informed, don't be naive. Again, if we were so inclined and if we had the time to do it, we could probably go person to person and say, tell me about a time, and this usually happens in youth, when you were uninformed or naive about a situation and someone took advantage of you. That happens, doesn't it? There are unscrupulous people who are just looking for, if you'll pardon the term, a sucker. And we know what that means by that. It is a derogatory term, but it means, someone who's gullible, someone who, you can be easily impressed or coerced, manipulated, maybe even without their understanding. And so knowledge and discernment, much like money as a defense, can sometimes help us. So learn, if you will, to some measure, and I'm going to be very careful in how I say this, the ways of the world. You remember Jesus told us a parable about an unjust steward? You remember the basic premise of that steward, that manager? Now, he'd been lazy, he hadn't been faithful, he had been using some creative accounting or maybe new math or whatever, and the boss, once the audit came in, realized he had been cooking the books, and so he said, you're going to be out of here, I'm canning you, your job position is going to be terminated. And what does that steward do? He begins calling in creditors, and the exact numbers you'll have to read as Jesus tells the parable. He said, one man owed 100 bushels of wheat. And he said, well, here, change your bill to say you only owe 80. And another guy owed so many gallons of oil. Of course, that's kind of the commodities that they traded in instead of money or stocks or bonds or mutual funds, silver or gold like we might have. They traded in agricultural commodities. So this is what you owe my master. Just go ahead and reduce your bill. And so, he got into the good favor of those creditors. When his job was terminated with that guy, he'd have another job presumably lined up with someone else. Now, is Jesus condoning or approving dishonesty? No, that's not the point of the parable. Jesus isn't saying if you're in a tight spot and need to, make the books work in your favor, just go ahead and fudge the numbers. That's not what Jesus is saying. That would go against the entire tenor of who he is as the Son of God. God is truth. Jesus was truth. He said the truth will set you free. But the point that he makes, he said the men or the sons of this world are more shrewd in their dealings than the sons of light. What's that mean? I think the best that I can understand what Jesus means there is that sometimes we don't adopt procedures and policies, not talking about being unethical or dishonest, but we don't consider, we're too naive, if you will, in some instances. So do we learn the ways of the world by experience? There are people that advocate for that type of approach to parenting and otherwise. Let your kids sow their wild oats. I had a guy tell me, and this was just mind-boggling to me when I heard it because I was a young man at the time, and it's still mind-boggling to me now that I've raised 3 sons to at least adulthood of a legal age. But I remember this guy telling me, he said, well, I'm going to let my kids get drunk just so they can see what it's like. And I said, I thought I heard you say you were going to let your kids get drunk so they could know what it's like. And he said, yeah, that's what I said. And I said, that is a stupid idea. I mean, can you think of a dumber idea than that? And I said, are you going to let your kids shoot themselves with a gun just so they know what it's like? I mean, that'd be the equivalent in my book. You don't experience something just so you can know what it's like. By the way, that same, approach or that same line of reasoning sadly permeates, though, the thinking of some, whether it's alcohol or drugs or sexual activity or all of these things. You say, well, kids need to try it once to see what it's like. And maybe it goes back to the, go out behind the barn and smoke a cigarette. Yeah, that happened too. And a lot that did that, you come back coughing and you turn green. You said, I'm never going to do that again. But for everyone that did that, maybe there was someone that got hooked and, died of lung cancer in a premature death. I don't know. But the idea of having to experience something in order to learn what it's like is not what the Bible teaches. And that's not what the wise man is saying here. But he does say, gain wisdom. And oftentimes that wisdom can come. This is what we tried to do with our boys, not so much by experiencing it yourself, but by pointing to those who have and seeing the outcomes, the ramifications of it. And you can point that to them, and you'd have to ask my boys whether that was successful or not. If you're visiting, I worked in a funeral home. I'm a funeral director, so that's where this story comes from. So you might think that's weird, the preacher's talking about that. But more than once, multiple times, dozens of times, Adam over there can tell you, I would come home and the boys at the end of the day, we'd just talk about back and forth. And I'd say, boys, I need to tell you about Billy Bob. We picked up Billy Bob today. What happened to Billy Bob, Dad? Well, Billy Bob made some poor choices. And I would tell them some of those things. I could tell them about Billy Bob, who began to use some illegal substance. And looking into his nasal cavity as I tried to prepare his body for burial because he didn't have a nose because the drugs had consumed it. I told them about one individual. He was actually an individual that graduated high school with me who got involved in some behavior that God's Word would say not to be involved in. And it caused a very serious disease that could easily be avoided. It's not something that's genetic. It's not something random chance. Like cancer, this is a preventable disease. And I'm not going to tell you which one it was, but he died a very, very unpleasant death before he was 40 years old. And so what did I do? What I hoped to do by that is saying, boys, listen, don't go down that road. The wise man, and not just in Ecclesiastes, but in Proverbs said, son, listen, don't go down that path. It leads where? It leads to death. That's true. Not just physical death, but spiritual death. So I have to hurry. Protection and preservation. Problem solving. I just threw this in there. Wise individuals analyze issues and find solutions. Earl Nightingale, I don't know if any of you have ever heard his name or not. He's kind of considered the father of motivational speaking. He said one of the ways to handle a problem is just write out the problem at the top of a legal pad and then list every possible solution. This kind of goes back what Proverbs describes as a multitude of counselors. You can consider other people and their input, but you can also oftentimes just kind of brainstorm yourself and ask God for that wisdom. James 1 verse 5, He'll provide it. Better judgment. Ecclesiastes 7 verse 19, wisdom strengthens the wise more than 10 rulers of the city. Wisdom gives you that broader perspective. And again, that wisdom comes not just from what you experience, but by looking at others, but most of all from God, who gives it when you ask Him in prayer. It's more effective than strength. Ecclesiastes 9, verse 13 to 18. This is a lengthier reading, but listen to the wise man here. He said, "This wisdom I've also seen under the sun. It seemed great to me. There was a little city with few men in it, and a great king came against it, besieged it, and built great snares around it. Now there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city. Yet no one remembered that same poor man. Then I said," here's what he's thinking, and it's a correct conclusion, "Wisdom is better than strength. Nevertheless, the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. Words of the wise, spoken quietly, should be heard rather than the shout of a ruler of fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good." So decision-making is something that is impacted in such a way that it can be more effective if coupled with wisdom than is strength. Brute force might fail. But wisdom is often undervalued. And so be an individual who pursues that kind of wisdom, again, asking God for it and knowing that He will provide. I was trying to think, and I meant to look it up this morning just as I was reviewing. There's an incident in the Old Testament about a city that's being besieged. Do you remember? And there's a man hiding in it that the other army wants. And a woman basically comes out to the opposing army and says, "Well, if we'll give you that guy, will you spare our city?" And they said, "Yeah." And so in just a moment, there comes the head of that guy over the city wall. You remember that story? It's just one of those interesting Old Testament stories that might illustrate this point. That's in 2 Samuel chapter 20, in verses 16 to 22. The woman cries out, and Joab is waiting. Joab is wanting to attack the army, or attack the city, and this woman says, "No, we can spare the city." And so the woman, in her wisdom, said to go cut off the head of Sheba, the son of Berechiah, and throw it out to Joab. And so it was. That's what they did. Now it's a gruesome, sort of ordeal there, but it's showing the value that comes sometimes with wisdom surpassing that of brute strength. Number next, guidance in life. Although man's wisdom cannot uncover life's ultimate purpose separate and apart from the wisdom God gives and gives in His Word, it helps people recognize perhaps even limitations. Chapter 1 of Ecclesiastes, verse 16 to 18, he said, "I communed with my heart, saying, Look, I have attained greatness and have gained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. My heart has understood great wisdom and knowledge, and I set my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. And I perceive that this also is grasping for the wind, for in much wisdom is much grief. And he who increases knowledge increases sorrow." Now this sounds like maybe almost contradictory to what we've said up to this point, but we have to recognize that human wisdom has limitations. And that's the entire message of the book, I think. No matter what we learn, no matter what wisdom we acquire, still if I divorce it from an understanding of God and submission to His wisdom, it's not going to provide me ultimately with that which I most need. Human wisdom is often noted, second to last there on your handout, by legacy building. Ecclesiastes 2:21. "There's a man whose labor is with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, yet he must leave his heritage to a man who has not labored for it. This also is vanity and a great evil." We've talked about this from really two different perspectives. We live our lives and we try to make it better for those who will follow us. Namely, usually children, grandchildren, maybe other family members, and as the opportunity extends, maybe even for the church and so forth, and others we might bless, and yet still their heir, those who inherit what we have worked hard for, might squander it. And so the legacy building that we should be concerned with, while it might include our money or properties and other assets, a far better investment, I would suggest, and I think the wise man is here implicitly telling this to us, a more lasting impact would be if we can build people spiritually, leaving them a legacy, if you will, of faith and devotion to God. That would be something to actually pursue. And then, I've mentioned it a time or two already, learning from experience. Ecclesiastes 7:23-26. All this I have proved by wisdom. I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. As for that which is far off and exceedingly deep, who can find it out? I applied my heart to know, to search, and to seek out wisdom, the reason of thoughts, to know the wickedness of folly, even of foolishness and madness. And I find more bitter than death, the woman whose heart is snares and nets, whose hands are fetters. He who pleases God shall escape from her, but the sinner shall be trapped by her. Wisdom enables people to anticipate dangers and hopefully avoid past mistakes. It allows us to hopefully see when we do have experiences that there is something to be learned from them. And all of us, I've told you some of my funny anecdotes already in this class. I'm not going to share any of those this morning, but sometimes that's humorous, but hopefully not just the humor of the experience and the folly of our going through it, but the wisdom that's gained helps us go forward in a more positive direction. So those are things related to human wisdom, or to what we might say common sense. But here's what we have to keep in mind. The limitations of human wisdom. It has serious shortcomings. And this is where no matter what we do to find control in life, and people like control. We said that at the opening. We want things to be in control. We want them to go a certain way. We want to plan and strategize. We want to expect that, we can do this. And again, if you listen to some of the commencement speeches that are delivered, in high schools or colleges and universities, that's the message. You can control your life. You can work hard. You can plan, and you can do all of these things. And if you do, the idea is it will always run smoothly. There'll never be any bumps in the road. And if it's up to you, you can do it. And that's a positive message, and it sounds so appealing, and it sounds so real and attainable. And yet, too often, they are not, those speeches and those words of wisdom shared, balanced by the understanding that life is still chaotic. Time and chance happens to them all. We've looked at this in previous lessons, but turn again to chapter 1. In chapter 1, he says in verse 4, one generation passes away, another generation comes. The earth abides forever. So what? Keep reading. The sun also rises, the sun goes down, hastens to the place where it arose. The wind goes toward the south, turns around to the north. The wind whirls about continually, comes again on its circuit. The rivers run to the sea, but the sea's not full. From the place where the rivers come, there they return again. Life does have some ordinary rhythms. It does have some things, if you will, that we can count on as it relates to natural phenomenon. And the seasons come and go. The sun comes up in the east, it sets in the west. The rain falls and then it runs off into the rivers and streams, and eventually the ocean, the condensation cycle, the rain cycle makes clouds form and the storms to come again and the rain to fall once more. But time and chance, life is still unpredictable, because when you turn to chapter 9 in Ecclesiastes, same book, same author, he'll say in verse 11, I returned and saw under the sun. Now, life under the sun, there are certain things to be expected that are predictable. But I've also observed, says the wise man, the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to men of understanding, nor favor to men of skill, but time and chance happen to them all. There is a certain unpredictability about life. Yes, sir. I'm reading the book before a while. Okay. I've seen it, yeah. Yeah, and the way that God has fine-tuned the universe, the more we learn, just the more amazing that understanding is, isn't it? And as soon as you write something about that, it's outdated. Even the things that Brother Wallace noted, even now we know so much more than we did then. But even in ancient times, people could look, for instance, at the stars and know how to navigate and things of that sort. And life has all of those things that seem to be set, and are unmovable. as it relates to natural phenomenon, and there is, in some ways, that certainty about the sun, about the seasons, and so forth. And at the same time, the balance to that understanding is what he says here in verse 11, we cannot control, as it were, fate. Now, here's where you can get into a big philosophical logjam when you try to distinguish between the sovereignty of God and then how you talk about things like determinism or fatalism. It's the question, is everything predetermined? And again, depending on kind of where you are at in your understanding of a number of different issues will depend on how you answer that question. There are individuals who believe that everything is predetermined, and by that, what they mean is, it is what it is. People say it is what it is, or it happened for a reason. And what they do ultimately, if they take that to its logical conclusion, is that they remove moral culpability. They remove free moral agency from the picture. That is, you cannot choose. You were forced to do this or that. Of interest, if you are interested in this, it's kind of fascinating to me where those who believe in evolution are taking their understanding of ethics in the last few years is that now they say, because there is no God, that's their, of course, primary prima facie kind of presupposition, they say that we're just chemical reactions. You're just a series of, different chemicals that formed into something called life. And you're just one big ball of chemical reactions. And so your choices are not, made after deliberating between the rightness or the wrongness about a particular course of action. It's just a chemical reaction. And you could not do other than what you did based on the given, inputs of that. Now, from science class, you can remember we all did this. If you put, a scoop of flour on, your whatever in your little dish, and then you poured vinegar on it, what happened? You got a reaction, didn't you? And the flour and the vinegar, whatever, the oxygen, you can tell I'm not the chemistry person. Linda's not up here to correct me. Miss McDuffie could tell us all of the chemical reactions that's happening, but they say that's what's going on in your life every day, just the multitude of advanced chemical reactions. You couldn't choose otherwise. That's where the atheist comes down on that. The hardcore hyper-Calvinist, as they might be called, looks at it from a different perspective and says, no, God is real and He's made the world, but He's also ordained everything to happen as it has and as it will. And so you have no choice in the matter. And this goes even down to the very opportunity whether or not to serve God or to not serve God, to be saved by God or to be condemned by God. And they use the terms elect and the condemned and so forth, and you don't even have a choice as it relates to your salvation. God has chosen to save some, He's chosen not to save others, and you really have no choice in that. Well, the Bible tells us that there is an element here of time and chance. There is the opportunity that we have to choose, and because we have the opportunity to choose and others have the opportunity to choose, things can be, and they certainly are, sometimes chaotic. Now, does that mean that God isn't aware of what's going to happen? No, He's omnipotent in His power. He's omniscient, knowing everything in His knowledge. But just because He knows everything doesn't mean that He causes it. Now, again, that causes my little brain to start hurting already when I try to juggle all of those simultaneous truths. And I can't do that very well. But here, the wise man, trying to help us in a very basic way, says, the race is not always to the swift. Sometimes you run a race and you might be the fastest runner, but you might not win the race. He was not a biblical writer, but Aesop, a Greek, maybe you could call him philosopher. Philosophers wouldn't really like that designation, wouldn't think he would rise to that status. But Aesop wrote a number of fables even before Jesus walked the earth. You remember one of the most famous is about the tortoise and the hare. Who should win a race between a tortoise and a hare, a rabbit? Well, a rabbit can outrun a turtle, can't it? 10 times out of 10. Except in the little story that he told, you remember, running the race, the rabbit decided to take a break. Snoozed under the shade tree, and the old turtle just slow and steady, what? Wins the race, right? The turtle eventually crossed the finish line first. So the race isn't always to the swift. The fastest runner can win. The strongest warrior may be defeated. Now the Bible gives you the perfect example, illustration of that. Who is it? What Bible story? The weak defeats the strong. The underdog wins. Who? Yeah, David and Goliath. I mean, that's the ultimate underdog story. Goliath's as big as a basketball goal. He has a spear and all of this equipment that probably weighs more than David does. And, he's killed no tellings how many men. He thinks David's like a little dog coming out to him. I'm going to easily dispatch with you. And David said, I'll show you, old buddy, the slingshot. And so the underdog wins. The wisest person can still suffer poverty. Your best investments can go sour. The innocent may be overlooked and may even be punished unfairly. So all of those things happen. Verse 12, man also does not know his time, like fish taken in a cruel net, like birds caught in a snare. So the sons of man are snared in an evil time when it falls suddenly upon them. Sudden misfortune, for whatever reason, can happen. An animal can be caught unexpectedly. Several years ago, and he was a member of the church actually in Clay County. Mr. Smith was his name. You've heard of Honest Abe Log Homes, haven't you? Mr. Smith that founded Honest Abe Log Homes was a member of the church in Clay County. And he was driving home one day, presumably in good health. There's no reason to suspect that there was any part that he played in the matter as far as any sort of poor choice or whatever else. He was driving home one day, and a tree fell across the road and onto his truck. Took his life. That's how he met his end. And when one of those weird, ironic, unexplainable kind of deals, what causes things like that to happen? God only knows. So the only true security is that, verse 1 of this same chapter, Ecclesiastes 9, I considered all this in my heart so I could declare it all. The righteous and the wise and their works are in the hand of God. People know neither love nor hatred by anything that they see before them. Is he saying just throw up your hands and quit? No, he's not saying throw up your hands and quit. He's saying recognize that wisdom, while valuable, is not infallible. Now, that sounds very similar, but listen to it again. Wisdom is valuable, but it is not infallible. Life is unpredictable, and it limits our human wisdom, so we must rely on God for true understanding and security. That's where we started. Fear God and keep His commandments. That's the whole of man. Put your life in His care. Do your best, yes, with the responsibilities He gives you. Do your best to gain wisdom and knowledge and exercise it in your diligence and in all of your endeavors. But recognize still that your care and your well-being is ultimately dependent upon God, and He will treat you as He wishes. And so being sure that we follow Him faithfully is all that matters, so that we will be ready to stand before Him in judgment whenever that time may come. Well, you can answer the discussion questions that there. Everyone's ready to come in. Next week we'll talk about clarity and confusion. Clarity and confusion. Well, that's something we all need to think about. So go ahead and read through that lesson and continue to read the book of Ecclesiastes. If you can read it in its entirety between now and next week, that'll benefit you. So maybe you can do that. But thank you for studying with us and being here this morning.